Sponsored by Factor. Hello my beautiful watchers. If this is your first time visiting my channel, my name is Dominic Noble. I usually talk about film adaptations of books regarding how loyally they stuck to the plot and themes, but I dabble in book reviews as well, and I have deep mental and emotional scars inflicted by the work of Erica Mitchell, aka E.L. James. A very quick history lesson to bring one and all up to speed. Between 2009 and 2011, Mitchell published Twilight fanfiction online under the username Snow Queen's Ice Dragon. Titled Masters of the Universe, the story described a much more erotic relationship between Edward and Bella, with graphic descriptions of these teenagers' sexual escapades. After it garnered a surprising amount of interest online, Mitchell rewrote the story to remove any explicit connection to its Twilight origin and published it as an original work, now titled 50 Shades of Grey. Despite being almost universally panned by critics for being extremely badly written, misrepresenting BDSM, and glorifying abusive behavior, the book sold outrageously well, having tapped into a sleeping behemoth of a demographic, namely readers who were extremely horny but did not usually indulge in erotica for whatever reason. Now using her pen name, E.L. James went on to write 2 sequels and 3 spin-offs in which she rewrote the same story but from the perspective of another character. All 3 books of the original trilogy were picked up for film adaptations, all of which also performed frustratingly well, though to be fair this was partially because the makers moved mountains to improve the story and characters any way they could. For more information, well, I already mentioned my mental scarring. In 2019, James apparently decided it was finally time to write something not directly tied into her flagship series and published her first standalone novel, The Mister. A while ago I agreed to read it for charity and here we are. If you've not read it, and I dearly hope for your sake that you have not, I just released a video in which I synopsisize it as sarcastically as possible. Assuming you have seen that, you vaguely know the plot of this mess of a book, so now we can talk about the writing. If this were any other author, I would suspect that this book had been intentionally written to be as hard to read as possible, to make a point about the mental states of the characters or some such, but because it's E.L. James, there is a 0% chance that the reasoning for the decisions made was in any way sensical. Many a time now I have mentioned James's continuing inability to grasp the simple concept that she does not need to micro-explain every action a character takes in a scene, dragging simple events out for multiple chapters. I swear to the old gods and the new, these arseholes couldn't even play some damn music without James describing them pulling out their phone, choosing an app, switching on the Bluetooth speakers, selecting a playlist and hitting play. We just don't need to hear it all, E.L. James. Write some actual plot into your books and stop describing turning on the fucking lamp. The second biggest issue is the format. The book is divided up between the 2 leads, but not evenly, and there doesn't appear to be any rhyme or reason dictating when a switchover is going to occur or how long each of their segments will be, besides, convenience. One character may ramble on for most of a chapter, or it might switch back and forth several times. On occasion, it will switch to the other POV for barely a paragraph before reverting. I didn't keep exact track, but I got the impression that Maxim was enjoying significantly more POV time than Alessia, though I will admit that might have been because time was dragging so much more when he was in the hot seat. Even more frustratingly, both POVs are written in the current tense, but Maxim's parts of the book are written in the first person, while Alessia's are in third person. Not only does this make it deeply jarring to switch between them, I personally deeply dislike third person current tense. There's just something so awkward about it, Maybe I'm alone in this, I don't know. It also creates a bit more distance between the reader and Alessia in particular. It sounds like Maxim is talking directly to you, but you're only hearing about her from someone else. Unless I have vastly misunderstood the target audience, this seems like a very odd choice to me. I would have thought that Alessia would be the person James wanted them to relate to, and Maxim the one they fantasize about being with, so surely this format should have been reversed. And on top of all of this, to get through this book, you also have to contend with these weird little things that can trip up your mind if you're not careful. For example, describing someone's smile as polite but warm. While these words are not intrinsically contradictory, a polite smile is usually used to suggest a certain degree of formality or unfamiliarity, whereas warm smile is traditionally used to mean genuinely friendly and welcoming. So how does one envision both of these things simultaneously? From context, I think that she was going for quizzical but warm, but as I've said before and no doubt will say again, E.L. James has never let a silly, inconsequential thing like the meaning of words get in the way of how she writes her books. Of course, deciphering word choices has nothing on trying to understand what the theme, influences, messages, and morals of this book are regarding making my head hurt. It's so hard to guess what the moral of the story is supposed to be in any E.L. James book because E.L. James doesn't resolve overarching plot or themes. She only resolves kidnappings. Personal issues and complex problems are set up throughout her stories, but the climax is always an emergency life or death situation that doesn't necessarily tie into anyone's character arc in a meaningful way, and once that's over, that's the end of the book. So in the same way that Gray's personal issues with his past and the way that he uses them to justify his current abusive behavior is never really resolved because the big climax to the 50 Shades trilogy was Anna getting kidnapped, anything that might conceivably be considered a theme, at least on Maxim's side of things, is abandoned after Alessia's kidnapping is averted. So I'm left wondering, was this character flaw or big life problem a bug or a feature? Were we not supposed to consider it a problem in the first place, or did James intend for it to be a thing but forgot to address it? I have a few theories about what she was going for, but there's glaring plot holes in all of them, which has put me in a bit of a moral quandary of sorts, because it would be a bit of a dick move for me to share my interpretation of the themes of this book with you, then explain why they missed the mark if they were never the intention of the author in the first place. It's not really fair to see patterns in the chaos and then get mad at the chaos because they're crap patterns. And yes, I do want to be fair, even to E.L. James. So I will share these theories with you and their gaps in logic and let you decide for yourself if these flaws are a failure in writing or a reason to suspect I am barking up the wrong tree and the events of this book just happened because they happened. As far as I can guess, James seems to be aiming for a garbled retelling of a fairy tale. A peasant girl meets a handsome prince in disguise and they fall in love. The prince is scared to reveal his true identity to her as it will change everything, then she's kidnapped by trolls or a dragon or whatever, and he rescues her so they can live happily ever after. However, the way she adapted this to her setting leaves this simple story so confused and muddled. I already mentioned in the synopsis video that while Maxim dithered about telling her he was an earl, he never held back in showering Alessia in examples of his vast wealth and powers, so the final reveal was only significant in that he had chosen to avoid mentioning it until then. It's not a big revelation that you're a prince if you have been living the prince lifestyle this whole time, you know? To add to the confusion, E.L. James appears to be attempting to villainize the rich while still glamorizing being rich. It might be more accurate to say that she seems to be all in favor of the money, but not the pressure and the responsibility that comes with having an aristocratic legacy to uphold or being old money in general. Maxim's mother is not subtly decried for being obsessed with the family lineage. Caroline is judged for having chosen to marry the richer brother over the one she had feelings for, and to top it all, it's revealed that Kit's accident may have been a suicide. As the only thing we are ever told about Kit throughout the story was he was super dedicated to his aristocratic duties, after a childhood of being trained and driven to exist for this sole purpose by his family, we can only assume that this is what led to his death, and Maxim could end up facing the same insane pressures now that he's taking over. However, obviously E.L. James thinks it would be super amazing to have a mega rich sugar daddy because that's her whole kink. That's what every male romantic lead she's ever written about has been all about. She clearly doesn't see an intrinsic link between the wealth and the lifestyle. It's perfectly possible to be a super rich, wonderful person. These guys are just doing it wrong. In fact, she goes further than just fetishizing it. She's almost worshipful of rich men in this. See, I originally assumed that the reason that Christian Grey was mega rich was because wealth is the most obvious non-mystical replacement for the vampires her characters were originally, but it seems old James's fixation with money has either transcended this origin or has always been more of a thing than she's let on. Her character Alessia continuously invites us to marvel with her over the extreme generosity and kindness of her overlord, implying multiple times that the fact that he is a rich man helping out a poor girl makes his kindness so much more significant than if it were a filthy normie being nice. Never mind the fact that he did nothing to earn this wealth, and most definitely ignoring the fact that the favors that he grants her are either not inconvenient to him in any way or done with extremely obvious ulterior motives. So, is the moral of this story it's amazing to have money but sucks when responsibility comes with it? Because yeah, motherfucking duh. And now, unfortunately, we have to talk about the consent issues, but here is a time code if you would like to skip past it. I got the distinct impression that E.L. James was attempting to respond to the criticism she received regarding consent in 50 Shades, but somehow in doing so, she actually makes it kind of worse. For example, people didn't like that Christian Grey was intentionally trying to get Anastasia drunk before strong-arming her into sexual acts she's not comfortable with, so Maxim repeatedly reminds himself it would be immoral to sleep with Alessia while she's intoxicated, but James, Erica, Snow Queen's ice dragon, that only works if he does not end up having sex with her anyway! I mean, I'm pretty sure I can guess what happened. He had a pretty serious attack of repressed grief, and James assumed that her audience would agree with her that the man's emotional needs outweighed the moral implications of sex with the inebriated. If this was true, it would have allowed her to have her cake and eat it regarding Maxim respecting informed consent and still getting to have sex, but seeing as the rest of us don't think in her twisted logic, instead she just drew attention to the fact that he knew it was wrong and did it anyway. In a similar theme, Maxim makes sure to get verbal consent from Alessia multiple times because he knows that in her part of the world, one will sometimes nod for no and shake their head for yes, and wishes to avoid there being any chance of a misunderstanding. Great, but in the same sex scene, he blatantly refuses to take no for an answer concerning certain sexual acts, including ignoring her attempts to physically fight him off.
Are you sure you want to do this? I ask. Her fathomless eyes stare into mine and I feel exposed, like she's scrutinizing my soul. It's sobering. I feel far more naked than I am. She swallows. Yes.
5 minutes later.
Maxim, she cries, scandalized, and she tries to pull his head away. Hush, he murmurs. It's okay, and his tongue replaces his nose as he resists her feeble attempts to stop him.
Like I said, I think this was James genuinely trying, which is so worrying. Consent really does seem to be something she only partially understands in principle. Right, let's discuss these new and original characters that she invented for her first foray out of the shades of grey. It really sucks that Maxim seems to be getting priority because while being in Alessia's head is no picnic, it is significantly less tiresome than hearing the 13th Earl of Trevithick's thoughts. E.L. James's method of writing a complex man apparently involves whiplashing between the horny and the emotional without warning. Maxim's internal monologue will describe coming and his grief over his dead brother in the same sentence. He's also incapable of switching off the crude thoughts no matter what emotional distress Alessia is in. My favorite example being, she's screaming at night because she has severe trauma, but I would like to make her scream with the sex. We also get constant updates on how his penis feels about the current situation.
My cock stirs at the memory. My cock stirs in anticipation. My cock stirs in agreement. My cock strains for more. My cock thickens in approval. My dick hardens at the memory. My dick rouses at the sight. It's music to my dick.
I know what you might be thinking, it's a dirty book, we're bound to hear some mention of genitalia, but you would be amazed how many of those examples took place during highly non-sexual moments. Other Maxim Trevelyan, the 13th Earl of Trevithick highlights include when he had a brief moment of panic when he noticed that Alessia was wearing a school sweater, and upon hearing that she was 23, his internal response was, and I quote, "Old enough. Good." Keeping in mind the oldest someone might be expected to wear a school uniform in Britain is 16 years old, one has to wonder just how young Alessia looks. Oh, and Maxim swears a lot in his head, it's usually just a single standalone expletive like Garbled would use, though because it's established he has a very posh accent, it's unintentionally hilarious to imagine.
Fuck. Fuck. Shit. Fuck. Shit. Shit. Bugger. 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 Bugger.
MaxiPad doesn't really have a character arc in this. He's basically unchanged from start to finish, unless you count not wanting to be a manslut anymore after falling for Alessia. Personally, I don't think you can though, because from the second he met Alessia, he's never tempted to fall back into his old lifestyle, he never resisted leaving it, and he never regrets its loss. He was kind to Alessia from the get-go, albeit with massive ulterior motives, so he always had the capacity to at least act nice. All in all, he hasn't really overcome anything by the end. He's still just a rich guy getting everything he wants. It's just that what he wants has shifted from many women to just one. Annoyingly, this character actually had plenty of potential for development, it was just squandered. He starts off hating that he has to be the Earl now and might be denied the carefree party boy lifestyle. I could see two possible paths for him regarding this. Either he grows up and learns to take responsibility for his obligations, or he realizes that the uber-rich aristocratic lifestyle is toxic for him, he doesn't need to be rich to be happy, and walks away from it. As the book went on and the obvious critiques of the upper-class lifestyle I mentioned started cropping up, option 2 seemed increasingly likely. As I said before, the book ends right after the kidnapping plot, and neither path had really been selected or resolved. There's no indication that Max is going to step up and embrace his role as a boss man, or step away from it all and live the quiet life. Personally, I can't imagine James writing a plot that involves someone no longer being uber-rich because, well, why would they be attractive after that? So I guess Maxim is just going to be miserable like his brother, but have a hot if juvenile wife with him along the way. Happy ending? Alessia, on the other hand, does kind of have an arc, if you are charitably willing to consider her being slightly braver by the end of the story when she verbally stands up to Antoli and sneakily unloads his gun, an arc. It does show a distinct improvement from how she behaved in the first and second time she was in danger, e.g. running away and literally wetting her pants. Unfortunately, the effect is ruined slightly because said pants wetting and newfound courage both occur in the last quarter of the book, so we're forced to assume that she went through this big change rather quickly between chapters 21 and 26, instead of seeing a progression throughout. One thing that kept coming back to me again and again while reading about this character was, this has got to be offensive to Albanians, right? It's hard to confirm because there is surprisingly little discourse available online regarding this book, but like, how could it not be? To be fair, James made a point of having Alessia mention that she came from a particularly rural and old-fashioned part of Albania, but when every character from a particular country is either a vulnerable child woman who thinks an ATM card might be magic, a violent misogynist who believes women should be their property, or literal slavers who make women their property, you can't help but wonder what the author's beef with this place is. Caroline, Kit's widow, is one of the few other characters that shows up more than once, and I'm really not sure what to make of her. I assumed she was either going to be the third point in a love triangle, or turn out to be a straight-up villain, or both, but like most other things, James ended up ticking none of the above. Maxi Boy is never tempted to actually date her. He clearly wants to go back to just being friends after their post-burial hookup. It's made clear that she was the instigator of said hookup. She tries to push him for another one on occasion. It's confirmed that she at least partially married Kit for his title and money, and she has a full snobby freakout when she finds out that Maxi Boy has stooped so low as to fall in love with someone of the lower classes. Ugh. If Max had an arc of his own, I would have suggested that perhaps she was there to be someone to compare him to show how much Alessia has changed him for the better by the end, but as I said, for better or worse, Max is pretty much the same person all the way through the story. It's also possible that she was there to represent the awful, toxic, aristocratic life that he was rejecting by choosing Alessia over her, though, again, as I've mentioned, I can't say for sure that this was even something that James was intentionally vilifying. Immediately after her meltdown, she chases Maxim down, apologizes, and has a "if you love her, go to her" moment, so if she was intended to be a villain, the stakes that she added to the story were basically non-existent. Oh, and at the start, she thinks she might be pregnant with Kit's child, but then she's not. Like her last-minute revelation that she thought that Kit had intentionally crashed his bike, it's just a thing that comes up and then goes away without impacting the story. So what the fuck was Caroline doing in this story? Was it just so James could include the banging your brother's wife guilt kink? And finally, Maxim has a friend called Tom who pops in and out of the narrative. There's a scene in a pub near the start that seems to only exist to introduce him and explain that he was a war veteran who served in the Coldstream Guards, the oldest active regiment in the UK Army, that he was injured in battle and that gave him PTSD. Later, he arranges security for all the people that Maxim wanted to protect but not have sex with, and then he comes with Maximilian Pegasus on his quest to Albania. Considering how much time was put into building up this character, who amongst you would like to guess how much he contributes to the climax of the book? What skills or acts of courage does he bring to the table during the chase and final confrontation? Ah yes, I see that you are wise in the ways of this author. Exactly fucking nothing. Tom's only contributions to the rescue of his best friend's girl is suggesting that they stop for drinks constantly on the way and then standing there motionless while people wave their loaded and unloaded guns around a living room. I have given up questioning these things. Tom is just there to be Tom, I guess. And now, a quick word about this video's sponsor. Loyal viewers may remember a few months ago I experimented with HelloFresh, and as delicious as that was, I found myself wondering what if I could do even less work for my healthy meals. Enter Factor and their never frozen, fully prepared meals created by gourmet chefs. Nothing is required of me but to heat these bad boys up and enjoy. It is so little effort for so much reward. Factor is owned by HelloFresh but offers an even wider variety of options. Personally, I enjoy the meat and seafood choices, but you can also select keto, calorie smart, chef's choice, vegetarian, or vegan. As someone who, after they turned 30, developed all of the allergies and food intolerances, I appreciate they provide options that plan around that. Factor delivers a box of these culinary treats right to your door. Most are pretty cool, though this particular box offended my honor and had to be slain in a duel. It was a worthy opponent. Use my link, go.factor75.com/noble130 and enter the code noble130 to get $130 off Factor. Take the stress out of grocery shopping and meal prep with Factor's no-hassle prepared foods and spend your time and energy doing the things you love instead. That's go.factor75.com/noble130 and the code noble130. Now, I didn't want to make this entire review about comparing this book to 50 Shades, but I am certain you guys will forgive me some indulgence regarding that. As I hinted at in my last video, the similarities are somewhat unmissable. A rich guy with hang-ups, a meek virgin, a kidnapping climax, and of course they all share just enough plot to fill a booklet but achieve novel length by the author describing and micro-explaining every action in excruciating unnecessary detail. Another thing they have in common is the way the female leads react to becoming kept women. I must confess I mostly missed this in my extensive 50 Shades reviews and had to have it explained to me later by better YouTubers because I am a very trusting person and I tend to take people's statements at face value. So when Anna kept insisting that Gray's constant attempts to shower her in luxury weren't necessary and were making her uncomfortable, I believed her, and I couldn't wrap my head around what the appeal was of being with someone who keeps ignoring your wishes. What I didn't realize was E.L. James was attempting to have her cake and eat it regarding letting Anna enjoy all of the benefits of having a sugar daddy without her coming across as a gold digger. When the finer things in life are genuinely being forced on you, well, what can you do but sigh frustratedly to yourself behind the wheel of your new Audi? Anyways, this time around I was expecting it, and indeed, Alessia is horrified that she's being showered with thousands of pounds worth of clothing, and Maxi Boy is attempting to get a phone for her, and she's only forced to accept his generosity under duress, such duress, by the desperate circumstances she's in. I think another reason I missed this originally is how unbelievably unnecessary it seems to me. If someone is not dating someone else specifically to get access to their wealth, then they are not a damn gold digger. You don't have to make them accepting gifts a constant struggle to prove that. Moving on, I will give James this. These characters benefited immensely from the increased honesty of purpose she put into them. It resulted in so much less dissonance between how they are described and how they act. Maxim Trevelyan is an obvious idiot, but there's no reason why he shouldn't be. He's incredibly affluent because he comes from old money, unlike Gray, who James continuously insisted was a self-made genius in all things including business, while he continuously made absolute dumbass decisions every time he was in the story, ran his company like a deranged teenager, and exclusively hired women based on them not looking like his deceased mother for fear that he wouldn't be able to resist sexually harassing them otherwise. In addition, Maxi Boy is is a total douchebag who thinks almost exclusively with his dick and lacks anything even approximating a moral compass, but he's not actively manipulative, he doesn't fly into constant rages and make his partner afraid of physical violence, and he never does anything anywhere near as vile as hickeying someone's skin to stop her from being able to dress too revealingly. I mean, he does seem to be equally jealous, but he has less opportunities to show it. He is, in short, kind of unpleasant and incredibly boring, but he's significantly less enraging than his predecessor, and I'll take that. Alessia also benefits from James being a bit more honest about her deal. Despite Anna acting like a confused child with about as much backbone as an octopus throughout all 3 books, every other character kept insisting on describing her as a strong-willed force of nature. Alessia, on the other hand, is allowed to lean into the fact that she's naive, overwhelmed, and submissive. Sexualizing her vulnerability is her whole reason for being here. Unfortunately, she is also significantly more boring than Anna, and as Anna was a frustrating but not necessarily hateful character, this is a step down this time. Anna was able to have thoughts beyond "I'm so frightened" and "I'm so horny," which is very much Alessia's only 2 settings. Okay, let's finish off this horror show with some rapid-fire complaints about the relatively minor issues I had with this book. At one point, having sex with someone while they are on their period is referred to as surfing the crimson tide. While I understand that James didn't coin this phrase, its inclusion still makes me sad. James unironically hit us with a #NotAllMen while comparing her handsome layabout to human traffickers. I hate that I know this, but Trevelyan was Christian Grey's adopted mother's maiden name. Yay, fun Easter egg, I guess. Maxim never stops referring to Alessia as his daily, even after he sleeps with her and after he realizes he has feelings for her. It's almost like he's still fetishizing banging his maid, or can never truly stop seeing her as his maid despite everything. E.L. James does not differentiate between how she writes an argument between 2 people and how she writes an internal argument with oneself, giving the distinct impression that her POV characters are literally hearing voices. This includes misunderstandings and clarifications. Her characters have to clarify things to themselves. It's so weird. Oh so great Maxim gets pissed at Alessia for choosing to confide about her traumatic past while he's busy paying for petrol, despite knowing that she gets triggered in rest stops because that was where she originally fled her human traffickers. It's established that Alessia's family doesn't have access to any more advanced technology than a single ancient computer and a TV, but when asked about what she watches, she mentions Netflix, which either means her family was rocking decent Wi-Fi despite this lack of technology, or E.L. James doesn't understand the difference between streaming and television, which is probably more likely considering she explicitly refers to Netflix as television. You might remember that Anna was always biting her lip in 50 Shades. Well, I guess James wanted to keep that going but wanted to give Alessia her own unique spin on it, so she described her as constantly biting her upper lip. Her upper lip. I try to avoid making sweeping statements regarding things that could in any way be subjective depending on your taste, but in this case I am confident in saying there is no conceivable way to bite one's upper lip in a sexy way. Middle, side, under the lips, it doesn't matter. It looks ridiculous and I cannot comprehend what James was envisioning when she wrote about it. Another message that I would love to get to James someday is leave Daphne du Maurier out of your crappy erotica, damn it. She was a good author and doesn't deserve to have her memory tarnished like this. Between copy-pasting the opening paragraph of Rebecca into 50 Shades, bringing up Jamaica in here, and naming her rich guy Maxim, James is not being subtle about who she wants to be considered a peer of. Hang about, if James had her knockoff De Winter banging his housekeeper, does that mean that she was shipping him and Mrs. Danvers? Okay, final thoughts. I am actually a little worried that my passionate hatred for this book might be making it sound more interesting than it actually is, because I have to confess all frustrations I've mentioned so far take a back seat to the mind-numbing boredom that comes from reading this book. It's so dull. The character building is dull, the romance is dull, the sex is dull, even what passes for action scenes are dull. While this book joined its fellows in selling better than it had any right to, it did underperform when compared to the novels that were a part of the 50 Shades franchise. One can only hope that this signifies that while James can coast on her name recognition to a point, the dark magic that fueled the success of her main series isn't transferable to anything else. So, we might one day be free of this demonstrously terrible writer dominating the bestsellers lists. That said, it's clear that in the here and now, James is still only capable of failing upwards, as less than a year after it was published, Universal Pictures announced that they intended to produce a film adaptation of The Mister. Which means that I am inescapably destined to revisit this book at least one more time. Help me.
Oh, who's banging the woman who cleans up his flat? Maxim traveling. And also the wife of his bro who would splat. Maxim traveling. If you dream of dating a son of a bitch, Maxim traveling. Then this crappy novel should do in a pinch. Maxim traveling. Ready? Maxim traveling. Maxim traveling. Maxim traveling. Maxim traveling.
Much love and appreciation to my patrons of honor, Shelby Holtz, Atel Spurdloff, and Trace Carter. Shout out to Ilnej for the credits music, check out his channel for more parody and original songs, and a huge thank you to this video's editor, Sophia Ricciardi. Links to her work in the video description.
You are my little agent of chaos. There's glowing plot holes. He knows that in her part of the world, one sometimes will shake their head for no and nod their head for no. That's just normal. So what the fuck was Caroline doing? Not Caroline, it's not Neil Gaiman.